The decade of the 1960s was a powerful time of awakening and change. It was often the music that raised the consciousness of the planet and awakened hearts to the things that really mattered. Much of the music of that era was filled with idealism and showed us how we could live, how the world could be, inspired us to forge a world of a bit more peace and justice. One of those songs, written already in 1949 by the great Pete Seeger, was the famous Hammer Song. It was later popularized by the group Peter, Paul and Mary in 1962. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. I'd hammer in the evening all over this land. I'd hammer out danger. I'd hammer out a warning. I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. After it was popularized, it became a freedom song for the civil rights movement in this country. Those were glorious days of idealism, days when you were proud to be a Catholic, days when you saw church leaders truly leading the way, forging a new world according to the vision of Christ. Among those great leaders of that day, one particularly stands out, a remarkable bishop from Brazil named Dom Helder Câmara. Dom Helder was a brilliant man and could have had a brilliant career, but instead chose to dedicate his life to the poor of his country. Like Mother Teresa, he was a tiny little thing, barely 5 feet tall, and he always appeared in his filthy, tattered old cassock, adorned only with a little wooden cross. Known as the Bishop of the Slums, he lived with the poorest of the poor. Dom Helder saw the injustice of the society around him and dedicated his life to making a difference in the lives of the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. He refused all the niceties of his office, never wore the purple sash of a bishop, never lived in the bishop's palace. Every day he took his meals at the corner bar, together with the working people. He got to know his people, became one of them. Dom Helder sold off church lands in order to give the land to those who had none. He formed credit unions and lobbied the government for programs for the poor. During the terrible, repressive days of the military dictatorship, he dared to raise his voice, the most powerful voice in the world. Dom Helder used to say, "When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist." He was not a communist, but he was certainly a saint. When good Pope John called together the bishops of the world for the Second Vatican Council, Dom Helder organized the bishops of the Third World to encourage the universal church to stand up for the poor, and that is just what they did. He found that he had a bell, and he wasn't afraid to ring that bell. If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning. I'd ring it in the evening all over this land. I'd ring out danger. I'd ring out a warning. I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Dom Helder organized the bishops of his country, and under his leadership they made the radical demand that the vast lands of Brazil that belonged to just a few families be redistributed among those living in subhuman conditions, the vast majority of the population. Already in 1955, he organized all the bishops of Latin America into a council of Latin American bishops, the first of its kind in the world. And by 1968, that group, known as CELAM, met together for a very influential meeting at Medellin, Colombia, in which the Latin American bishops cast aside their old role of being on the side of the rich and powerful and came out publicly with a preferential option for the poor. The accusing words of St. James, which we have heard today, were coming to fulfillment. Behold, the wages you withheld from the workers who harvested your fields are crying aloud, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. An amazing thing was happening under the leadership of Dom Elder Camara. The church had become a church of the poor, a church according to the mind of Jesus. The reaction in Brazil was swift. The generals took over the country in December of that year, declared martial law, dissolved parliament, did away with all human rights and the freedom of the press. The secret police were sent out to imprison, torture, and kill any opposition. Many priests were tortured and murdered, especially those working in collaboration with the great Archbishop Elder. He did not hesitate to speak out publicly against the torture and murder of his priests and people. For this he was blacklisted. His name was not allowed even to be mentioned in newspapers, and his voice disappeared from the airwaves. But he continued speaking out. His life was in constant danger, yet he refused any bodyguards or even a lock on his door. It was almost miraculous that time after time those sent to assassinate him in the disguise of a beggar or a taxi driver would take one look at him and break down in tears. They could not do it, but rather confessed to him and begged for forgiveness. Dom Elder became the most widely known religious figure in the world and received more recognition than any other Brazilian except the great soccer player Pelé. 4 times he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, but because of the military government's pressure through their embassy in Oslo, this was denied to him all 4 times. But he kept on raising his voice. He had a song to sing, and he sang it from the bottom of his heart. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning. I'd sing it in the evening all over this land. I'd sing out danger. I'd sing out a warning. I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Dom Elder continued singing his song, and his prayer was, "By the grace that you have granted me of silence without loneliness, give me the right to plead, to clamor for my brothers and sisters imprisoned by a loneliness without silence." In 1985, Dom Elder was forced to retire. The great question was, who was to take his place? The Pope who adored him, Paul VI, was dead. The radically progressive and saintly John Paul I was found dead after only 33 days in office. Now priorities in the church changed drastically. Preferential option for the poor was no longer on the agenda and would not become a priority again until 2013. One by one, the old progressive bishops were forced into retirement and replaced by those who would support once again the rich and the powerful. It was no different in the diocese of Dom Elder Camara. The man who took his place dissolved all of his human rights programs and became notorious for calling in the police to suppress his rebellious priests and lay people. But Dom Elder's hammer had forged a new world. Dom Elder's bell had rung out a new order. Dom Elder's song could not be stifled. This archbishop was not a revolutionary, not a theologian. He was a prophet, the male version of Mother Teresa, standing in solidarity with the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. He used to say, "For me, people are not divided into believers and non-believers. They are divided into oppressors and oppressed. They are divided into those who want to keep this unjust society and those who want to struggle for justice." If only I had a hammer, you say. You do. And if not a hammer, you have a bell. And if not a bell, you have a voice, a song, a heart that is beating loud enough to be heard. You may not be a Dom Elder, a Pete Seeger, a Gandhi, a Lincoln. You may not be a Mother Teresa, a Francis of Assisi, a Francis of Buenos Aires. You must be yourself. But you cannot close your eyes, your heart, your lips to the injustice around you. Pick up that hammer, ring that bell, sing that song, and make a more loving, a more just, a more human world for all. Well, I've got a hammer, and I've got a bell, and I've got a song to sing all over this land. It's the hammer of justice. It's the bell of freedom. It's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Amen.